Just Talon, not Miss Voss, not the attorney. Just Talon, in the warmth of the lamplight, with the man she had loved since she was 23 and had never fully stopped. It felt like the first time. It was. She woke to the mountain light and the smell of coffee and the specific, unfamiliar happiness of waking in a place you're glad to be. He was sitting on the edge of the bed when she opened her eyes, already dressed, watching her with that quiet smile. In his hand was a small box, dark velvet, corners worn, not new, she noted, not purchased yesterday. I need to do this properly, he said. She pushed herself up onto one elbow. You already... That was the question, he said. This is the answer to what comes next. He opened the box. The ring was magnificent, not ostentatious, nothing that announced itself from across a room, but close up, extraordinary. A central stone of deep, clear color, set in a band of fine, detailed metalwork that looked like it had been designed rather than simply made. It looked, she thought, like something that had been thought about, like something chosen by someone who understood that the object was not the point, but the object still mattered. I have been carrying this, he said, for longer than I'm going to tell you right now. We will revisit that conversation at a later date, when you are less likely to use it against me in a professional capacity. She laughed. It came out of her warm and unguarded, and she let it. Talon. He set the comedy aside and looked at her, and his voice settled into that register. The true one, the low one. I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want a life with you. Not a project, not a place, not any version of any future I have ever imagined. Nothing has ever felt this necessary. He held the box toward her. You are the structure I want to spend the rest of my life building. And I am asking you again in the same 12 hours, which I recognize is a great deal, to do me the extraordinary honor of marrying me immediately, as soon as possible, before the universe finds a reason to put more years between us. She looked at the ring, at him, at the morning light on the mountains beyond the window. She thought about the firm, about the cases stacking up, about the neat and deliberate architecture of the life she had built with such care. She thought about the floor and the art and the empty apartment and the Thursday blow-dry appointment and the siblings she didn't know how to be with. She thought about waking up like this. Yes, she said, again, still true. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. Of course it fit. Later that morning, Lara was on his phone at the window, his back to her, speaking quietly. She watched him for a moment. The set of his shoulders, the particular focused stillness of him in the early light, and felt the calm move through her like weather. He turned, saw her watching, and said something into the phone and hung up. Good morning again, he said. What are you doing? He came and sat on the edge of the bed, and his expression held that quality she had come to recognize, the ease of a man who has decided something entirely and is now simply executing it. There's a courthouse in town, he said. They open at 9. He looked at his watch. We have an hour and 40 minutes. She looked at him. He looked back at her, steady, certain, warm. She turned to the window. The mountains were clear this morning. The first snow on the peaks catching the early light. The sky above them a blue of almost unreasonable clarity. Below, the village was beginning its morning. Smoke from chimneys, the sound of something opening, the particular peacefulness of a place that has been settled for a long time and knows it. She watched it all. This man at the edge of her bed, this ring on her finger, this morning at the end of something and the beginning of everything. She was not afraid. She thought she might have been watching him for a while now. Watching him the way you watch someone you already know the end of. 60 minutes, she said. I need 60 minutes. He smiled. I'll make coffee. He went. She lay there for a moment longer, looking at the ceiling, and then she sat up and reached for her clothes and began, with absolute unhurried calm, to get ready to get married. It was a yellow summer dress, cotton, soft, the color of something warm, not gold, not ivory, but the specific yellow of late afternoon light coming through a window. She had bought it 2 years ago for a reason she couldn't now remember, and worn it exactly once. It fell to just below the knee, and had no particular architectural ambition. And she looked in the mirror, wearing it, and thought, yes, this one. She couldn't have explained it to anyone, but some choices don't require explanation. They require only the willingness to trust the part of yourself that knows without reasoning, the part that existed before you built all the careful apparatus of your competence over it. The white dress was for the woman she had constructed. The yellow dress was for the woman underneath. She looked, Lara told her, like spring. She felt, for just a moment, standing in the courthouse corridor, with mountain light coming through the high windows, like something very young and very old simultaneously, like a person arriving at a place they had been walking toward for so long, and that the arrival felt less like an event than a recognition. They met the other couple in the waiting area, occupying the same narrow corridor of anticipation that serves as the antechamber to courthouse weddings. Those particular ceremonies that dispense with the theatre and go directly to the architecture of the thing. The couple was young, genuinely young, in the way that makes 38 feel like a considered, well-traveled distance from the starting point. The girl had the luminous, slightly disbelieving expression of someone to whom everything is still happening for the first time, and the young man beside her wore a suit that cost more than Talon's first month's rent, and held his new wife's hand with the two-handed grip of someone afraid she might lift off without him. Old money, Talon assessed, in the specific way she assessed things, quickly, accurately, without malice. Eloped, 23, 24 at most. The world still arranged for them in the uncomplicated colours of certainty. She felt a complicated warmth toward them that surprised her. They agreed to witness each other's ceremonies with the easy camaraderie of strangers sharing a particular kind of weather. And when the young woman reached over and squeezed Talon's hand before the registrar began, Talon looked down at the girl's fingers on hers and thought, in 15 years, I wonder what you'll know. And then she looked at Lara. He was calm. This was the thing that stayed with her afterward. Not the words of the ceremony, which were brief and plain, and all the more waitful for it, but his calmness, the specific, grounded stillness of a man entirely at home in the moment he was occupying. He held her hands and looked at her with those soft eyes and said what he was asked to say, and she said what she was asked to say. And the yellow dress caught the mountain light, and it was over in the time it takes to decide something you have actually already decided. She felt extraordinary. She also felt, in some quieter chamber of herself that she did not open to examine, a tremor, not doubt, not precisely, more the feeling of a person stepping off a known surface onto one they cannot yet see the full extent of. The feeling of a woman who has built her entire life on the bedrock of what she can verify, standing in a yellow dress in a mountain courthouse, having done something on faith alone. She held Lara's hand and felt extraordinary, and tremored quietly and said nothing about either. He was calm. It helped. She wondered briefly if he had always been this calm, if there was a version of this ease that came from practice. She let the thought go. She was good at letting thoughts go when she needed to. They drove back to Seattle in the late afternoon, the mountains releasing them gradually back to the city, and the ring on her finger caught the light at intervals as she watched the road unspool ahead of them. She said very little. He said very little. It was the silence of two people who have just done something large and are allowing it to settle before they start talking around it. He moved into her apartment that evening. His things arrived in stages. A bag first, then a case, then the particular accumulating presence of another person beginning to occupy a space that has been calibrated for years to hold only one. His books appeared on the shelf beside hers, his coat on the hook by the door. A brand of coffee she didn't buy, appearing in the cupboard. His phone charger on his side of the bed, which was the left side, and she had always preferred the right. So the geometry of it was entirely workable, and she noted this with the private, slightly embarrassed satisfaction of someone discovering that the thing they were afraid of fits. She liked it. She had not been certain that she would, and she liked it. She caught herself doing things she had no precedent for. Cooking on a Tuesday evening because he'd be home for dinner. Leaving the lamp on in the hallway because she liked the idea of the apartment looking warm when he came up from the elevator. Small domestic renovations to a life that had previously been very clean and very orderly, and she could now admit very quiet in the way that has nothing to do with sound. She hid the fact that she had moved her good stationery to a different drawer so it wouldn't be disturbed. She hid her professional journals behind the novels on the lower shelf and told herself it was tidiness. She hid most carefully the specific and somewhat alarming happiness she felt when she heard his key in the door, filing it away in the part of herself she had always kept under strict administrative control. It didn't feel rushed. That was the thing that stayed with her when she examined it honestly. It felt different, new in the specific way that only the right things are new. Not disorienting, but clarifying. The weeks took on a shape she hadn't known her life could take. Lara worked from the apartment in the mornings, his laptop open at the kitchen table, structural drawings spread beside his coffee, phone calls conducted in the low, precise voice of a man explaining load-bearing things to people who needed to understand them. She would leave for the office while he was mid-sentence sometimes, pausing at the door to watch him for a moment before he noticed. The way he held his pen between his fingers while he thought. The way his whole face changed when the engineering problem resolved itself. The quiet pleasure of a man doing work he understood and trusted. She watched him the way she watched things she was still in the process of believing in. On the evenings he played cricket, she found herself tracking the time differently, not watching the clock exactly, but aware of it in a new way. The way you become aware of a door you are expecting to hear. She started leaving the office before 7, which her senior associates noted without comment, and with expressions that she chose not to investigate. She did not tell her siblings. Marcus called on a Sunday, and she answered from the kitchen, standing at the counter with her coffee, while Lara read on the couch in the other room. And she talked to her brother for 11 minutes about things of no particular consequence, and she said nothing at all about the man 20 feet away who was her husband. And when she hung up, she stood with the phone in her hand for a moment and felt the particular loneliness of a joy you haven't yet given anyone permission to see. She would tell them when it was settled, when she had assessed the full dimensions of it and was satisfied with the structure, when she was ready to let it be real to other people, which would make it irreversible in a way that went beyond legal. She was not ready yet. The legal loophole came to her in the way the best ones did, not as a discovery, but as a recognition, something she had known that simply clarified itself in light of new circumstances. They were eating dinner when she raised it. Lara listened with the attentive patience he brought to things he didn't fully understand, but trusted her to. And then he looked at his plate for a moment, and then back at her, and said, "If you think it's right." She said she did. She said she would take care of the paperwork. She took care of the paperwork. The children conversation happened on a Wednesday in October. She had been thinking about it for weeks, had been circling it the way you circle a thing you need to say, but are not yet ready to hear the answer to. Aware all the time that the circling was not neutral, that time was a variable in this particular equation, in a way it was not in most of the equations she managed. She looked at him across the table and said it plainly, because plain was the only way she knew to say the things that mattered most. That she wanted children, that she was 38, that the window was not closed, but it was. She used the word deliberately, precisely, finite, that she needed to know if this was something they were moving toward, and when, and with what intention. Lara set down his fork, and he was gentle. He was warm and careful and entirely present, and he reached across the table and covered her hand and told her there was time. There was plenty of time. She was to stop worrying. He talked about the asset transfer still pending, about the need to get properly settled before adding complexity, about timing, about the next few months, the need for patience. She listened. She smiled and nodded and squeezed his hand and said she understood. Later, when he was sleeping, she lay in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought about Vanessa, who had told him not yet, wrong time, next year, according to Lara. She thought about this for a long time. She was very still while she thought about it. She cried after that on 2 separate occasions, both times alone, both times briefly and without any concession to the kind of crying that makes noise or draws attention. Once in the bathroom with the tap running, once in the car in the parking garage below the office, sitting with her hands in her lap and the engine off and the fluorescent lights humming overhead while something moved through her that she did not name and did not examine and did not permit anyone to witness. She sat with the feeling the way you sit with a verdict you already knew was coming. There was no drama in it. There was only the quiet, methodical recognition of a woman who had spent 11 years reading the evidence of what people do when they think no one is paying sufficient attention. Something was coming apart, or rather, and this was the thing she sat with in the cold garage, in the yellow light, with her hands folded in her lap. Something had already come apart. She just needed to verify the load-bearing elements before she made her move. She was very good at that. She had been back at her desk for 3 months when she called him. She asked him to come to the office for lunch. He suggested Augusto's. Of course he did. With the easy, proprietorial confidence of a man who believes himself to be the author of the story. And she told him no. She told him to come to the office. Something in her voice perhaps closed the negotiation. He arrived at noon. She was behind her desk when Yasmin showed him in, and she did not get up. She did not come around the desk to greet him. She was sitting very straight in the chair she rarely sat in. Her chair, the one that had always done its work from a distance, with her hands folded on the desk and her eyes on him as he came through the door. He saw it immediately. He saw it, and something shifted in his expression. The slight, involuntary recalibration of a man who has walked into a room and understood before anything has been said that the temperature has changed. Her eyes were red, puffy at the edges, the skin below them carrying the specific tender weight of crying that happened some hours ago and was done with now. She had not concealed it. She had looked at herself in the bathroom mirror this morning and decided with cold deliberateness not to. Talon. He moved toward her. What happened? What's... Sit down. Her voice was quiet, even. Please, tell me what... Lara. The name in her mouth, final and clear as a gavel. Sit down. He sat. She looked at him across the desk. This man, this beautiful, warm-eyed, cedar-scented man, and she held his gaze for a long moment and felt the full weight of everything that look had cost her. I know what you are. She said. He blinked. What? The silence between them was very precise. I know what you are, she said again. And this time she opened the folder. The papers came across the desk in sequence, not thrown, She was not a woman who threw things, but spread methodically, each document placed with the particular deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this in the quiet hours and knows the order matters. From the beginning, she said, her voice had found its courtroom register now, the one that carried without effort, that left no space for interruption, that had made judges lean forward and opposing counsel go still. You told me you had looked me up before that morning at Augusto's. You said you'd been trying to bump into me for a week or two. She placed a document on the desk. That was generous of you. The truth is, you called this office 7 months prior, inquired about my availability, spoke to Yasmin, and gave a false name. Another document. And 3 months before you appeared at my table, you signed into this building's reception, took a visitor's pass. You stood in my lobby, Lara. You looked at the art and walked around the offices. Something moved through his face, controlled, quickly covered. You were surveying, she said. Talon, I will tell you when it's your turn. He closed his mouth. She turned a page. Morocco. She placed a photograph, a document, a marriage certificate, a transfer record. Her name was Amira, architectural heiress, married 14 months, settlement significant, routed through Cyprus. Another page. Houston, Diane, energy wealth, 3rd generation, married 11 months, settlement routed. She looked up briefly through Cyprus. Another. Chicago. Her name was Renata. 18 months. Settlement. Cyprus. The last. Vancouver. Lisa. Not my sister, you'll note. Though I found the coincidence illuminating. Tech money. 14 months. She folded her hands. 4 marriages, she said, before Vanessa. 4 extraordinarily wealthy women. 4 short marriages. 4 settlements, each of which should have made you comfortable for the rest of your life, all of which, she turned one final page, were systemically moved into accounts in Cyprus, not Vanessa's accounts, Lara. We spent weeks assuming that Cyprus was Vanessa protecting herself. She allowed herself one small, controlled pause. It was you. You had forged her name across 3 layers of corporate paperwork, and you counted on the complexity of it to keep her from looking closely enough to see it. The room was absolutely still, and then, slowly, like something surfacing, he smiled. The warmth went out of it first, and what was left was something she had not seen on his face before. The particular, unhurried arrogance of a man who has decided there is no longer any performance required. You always were, he said, with something that might have been genuine admiration if it hadn't been so terrible. The smartest woman I have ever known. He leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at her with the composed ease of a man recalculating and finding the new position acceptable. We don't have to do this, he said. His voice had changed, still smooth, still warm, but differently warm now. The warmth of a tool being used rather than a feeling being expressed. Think about what we have. Think about what we are together, Talon. This was real. All of it. Real. We could be happy. Genuinely. Completely happy. He tilted his head. I'll sign a post-nuptial. Full disclosure. Complete transparency. Whatever you need, to feel secure. He stood, and with a familiarity that turned her stomach and commanded her admiration in equal measure, he crossed to her cabinet, lifted the bottle, and poured himself a glass of her whiskey. Her whiskey. He turned back to her, glass in hand, and his expression was the expression of a man who believes he is still holding the better cards. Besides, he said, with the smooth gentleness of someone explaining arithmetic to a bright child, whatever I accumulated before this marriage, the settlements, the assets, the Cyprus accounts, those are premarital funds protected under Washington state law. He took a sip. You know that as well as I do. You can't touch any of it. She looked at him. She let the silence go for exactly the right number of seconds. Long enough for him to settle into his certainty, to feel the full security of the position he believed he was standing in. Then she said, "You're correct." He nodded. Premarital funds are protected, she said, in most cases. She tilted her head slightly, the same angle he had used on her across 100 coffee cups and quiet evenings, and felt the gesture return to her now, like a weapon she had only just unsheathed. But you were so eager, Lara. You were so beautifully, specifically eager to marry me quickly, before the settlements cleared, before the asset transfers completed. She opened the last page of the folder. By the time the funds moved, we were married, and because you were so very keen for me to help expedite the transfer of your assets, because you handed me that paperwork, and I was so willing to find you that legal loophole. She smoothed the page with one hand. Every cent of it moved into our joint account. gone very still. That, she said quietly, is called commingling. The moment those premarital assets entered a jointly held marital account, they became marital property. She looked at him with the clear, steady eyes of a woman who has known this moment was coming for a long time and has not wasted the preparation. Which means I am entitled to half. The glass was in his hand. He did not move. The city held its breath outside the glass. She stood. She came around the desk slowly, and she stopped in front of him, and she looked up at him. This face she had loved and studied and decoded and grieved over, and she let herself feel for just one unguarded moment the full weight of it. The 15 years, the yellow dress, the ring, the cottage, the fire, the candle-lit dinner, his voice on one knee on a threshold, saying the universe wants this for us. And she held all of it, and she let it be what it was, and she let it be over. I loved you, she said softly. I want you to know that. It was real for me. It was entirely real. She rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek. Warm, final, the last thing freely given. Then she reached out and took the whiskey glass from his hand and turned and walked toward the window. She raised the glass, took a slow sip. The city spread out below her. All 20 floors of everything she had built, everything she had protected, everything she had refused to let anyone take from her. And it was still there. All of it still there. Behind her Lara Agatha said nothing. There was, for once, nothing left to say.